The Eyes That Saw Beyond the Horizon, December 7th, 1942, Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. So 347 hours local time. The jungle breathes in the darkness. Moisture drips from leaves the size of dinner plates, each drop a metronome, marking time in a war where minutes mean the difference between survival and annihilation. On a ridge above Henderson Field, a structure squats against the tropical night, a canvas tent housing something the Japanese High Command does not believe exists. Inside, Private First Class Robert Chen stares at a circular screen, glowing green in the darkness, watching phosphorescent blips crawl across glass like luminescent insects. His hand trembles slightly as he reaches for the field telephone. 43 miles to the northwest, invisible beyond the curve of the earth, a formation of Japanese bombers is climbing through cloud layers, their pilots confident that surprise belongs to them. They are already dead. They simply do not know it yet. The radar set, an SCR-270, the same model that detected the Pearl Harbor attack but was ignored, hums with the sound of electricity turning into omniscience. Chen counts the blips, 18, maybe 20. He cranks the telephone handle and speaks 3 words that will decide who lives and who dies in the next hour. Bogies inbound, northwest. Across Henderson Field, pilots sleeping in muddy foxholes jolt awake. Mechanics prime engines. Guns swing toward empty sky. By the time the Japanese formation crosses the coastline, 32 American fighters are already at altitude, positioned between the bombers and their target, waiting like wolves at a narrow pass. The Japanese flight leader will report, in his final radio transmission, that American fighters appeared as if summoned by sorcery. It was not sorcery. It was physics, weaponized. 1 year earlier, Japanese naval intelligence had issued a comprehensive assessment of American technological capabilities. The document, stamped most secret and distributed only to senior staff officers, concluded that American radar technology was primitive and unreliable, suitable only for coastal defense and ship-to-ship ranging. The assessment noted that American industrial culture favored mass production over precision, that American scientists lacked the theoretical sophistication of European researchers, that American equipment was designed for convenience rather than performance. The report concluded that radar-directed air defense was theoretically possible, but practically unachievable given current American technical limitations. Every word of that assessment was wrong, but the error was not random. It was the inevitable product of a worldview that could not imagine what it had never seen. The Japanese Navy had its own radar, primitive sets installed on capital ships, useful for navigation and surface search, but incapable of detecting aircraft at useful ranges. Japanese naval aviation doctrine had evolved in an environment where surprise was a function of weather, timing, and route selection, variables that could be controlled through superior planning and discipline. The idea that an enemy could simply see you coming, could watch your formation assemble and track your approach from beyond visual range, was not part of the tactical vocabulary. It was not that Japanese officers were stupid or incompetent. They were brilliant tacticians operating within a framework that did not include the possibility of their own obsolescence. This is what American radar did. It made obsolete every doctrine, every tactic, every assumption about naval and air warfare that had been developed over the previous 3 centuries. It turned the sky into a readable text. It transformed defense from a reactive scramble into a choreographed intercept. It gave American commanders what military theorists call decision time, the precious minutes between detection and contact during which choices multiply and advantage accrues. The Japanese had planned for war against an enemy who would fight the way they fought, with the weapons they understood. They got something else entirely. The technology itself was not mysterious. Radio waves bounce off solid objects. By measuring the time between transmission and echo, you can calculate distance. By analyzing the direction of the echo, you can determine bearing. Put these together and you have position. Update the position continuously and you have track. Combine multiple tracks and you have a picture of the battle space that exists independent of weather, darkness, or visual range. The British had developed this during the Battle of Britain. The Americans had industrialized it, miniaturized it, and deployed it across the Pacific on a scale that bordered on the promiscuous. By late 1942, American forces had radar on ships, on islands, on mountaintops, in jungles. They had early warning radar, fire control radar, search radar, height-finding radar. They had radar that could see aircraft at 100 miles, radar that could track individual shells in flight, radar that could guide interceptors to within visual range of targets they had never seen. The Japanese had reports of this. Fragmentary intelligence from captured equipment, observations from pilots who survived encounters with American fighters that seemed impossibly well positioned, intercepted radio chatter that suggested coordination beyond what visual spotting could provide. But reports are not understanding. The Japanese naval staff looked at these fragments and tried to fit them into existing frameworks. Perhaps the Americans had exceptional spotters. Perhaps they had broken Japanese codes. Perhaps they were simply lucky. The possibility that a fundamental shift in the nature of warfare had occurred, that the invisible had become visible, that the electromagnetic spectrum had been turned into a weapon. This was too large a conceptual leap. So they dismissed it or minimized it or assumed they would develop countermeasures before it mattered. They were wrong about the timeline. By December 1942, the war had already been transformed. The Japanese Navy continued to plan operations as if surprise was achievable, as if attacking formations could approach undetected, as if the night and weather were allies. American commanders planned with different assumptions. They knew where Japanese aircraft were before Japanese pilots knew they had been detected. They could vector interceptors, pre-position combat air patrols, evacuate vulnerable aircraft, alert anti-aircraft batteries, all before the enemy crossed the horizon. This was not a tactical advantage. It was a strategic revolution wrapped in the mundane language of early warning systems. March 2, 1943. The Bismarck Sea, north of New Guinea. A Japanese convoy carrying 7,000 troops to reinforce ley steams southward under heavy cloud cover. The convoy commander, Rear Admiral Masatomi Kimura, has chosen his route carefully. The weather is abysmal. Low clouds, heavy rain, visibility measured in hundreds of yards rather than miles. American air bases in New Guinea are known to be active, but in this weather, he reasons, they cannot find his ships. He has 16 vessels, 8 transports, 8 destroyers. He has air cover from Rabaul. He has the ocean's vastness as camouflage. He has everything except the one thing that matters, invisibility. At air rate 15 hours, an American B-24 Liberator equipped with ASV, air-to-surface vessel, radar, detects the convoy at 28 miles. The pilot never sees the ships. He does not need to. The radar screen shows him 15 distinct contacts, their positions, courses, and speeds. He radios the information back to Port Moresby. Within an hour, every American aircraft in theater is being armed and fueled. By 1,000 hours, the first attack wave is airborne. By 1,600 hours, all 8 transports and 4 destroyers have been sunk. The troop reinforcement for Leh is swimming in oil-slicked water or dead. The Japanese lose more men in this single convoy than they lost taking Singapore. They lose more shipping tonnage than they can replace in 6 months of construction. Admiral Kimura survives. In his after-action report, he struggles to explain how American aircraft found his convoy in weather that should have made detection impossible. He notes that the attacking aircraft approached from angles suggesting prior knowledge of his position. He speculates that perhaps a submarine had tracked him, or that Australian coast watchers had better coverage than anticipated. He does not understand that he was visible on a screen in Port Moresby before his ships left harbour, that his convoy was tracked continuously from departure to destruction, that the ocean's vastness and the weather's concealment meant nothing against a technology that turned radio waves into sight. This is the arithmetic of radar. Detection at 30 miles gives 15 minutes of warning at typical aircraft speeds. 15 minutes is enough to launch interceptors from idle. 20 minutes is enough to reposition formations. 30 minutes is enough to evacuate an airfield or concentrate anti-aircraft fire. The Japanese planned operations with the assumption that detection occurred at visual range, 5 miles on a clear day, less in weather. Their entire tactical doctrine was built on the geometry of visual warfare. Radar expanded that geometry by a factor of 10, and in doing so, made every Japanese tactical manual obsolete. But it was not merely the technology. It was the integration of technology into doctrine, the transformation of data into decision, the speed with which American forces adapted to a new way of understanding battle. The Japanese had radar too by 1943, captured examples, indigenous development, desperate copying of principles they were beginning to understand. But having the device is not the same as building a system around it. American forces had dedicated radar operators, standardized reporting protocols, direct communication links between detection and response. They had practiced intercepts until pilots could navigate by radio direction, could find targets they never saw, could turn abstract coordinates into kills. They had built an entire tactical ecosystem around the assumption that battle began not at contact, but at detection. The Japanese tried to adapt. They flew lower, seeking to exploit radar's difficulty with low-altitude detection over water. They attacked at night, when radar operators were tired and displays were harder to read. They varied their approach routes, hoping to find gaps in coverage. Some of these tactics worked temporarily, but the fundamental problem remained. They were trying to achieve surprise against an enemy who could see them coming. It was like trying to sneak up on someone while wearing a bell. You might occasionally succeed through luck or distraction, but the odds were always against you. By mid-1943, Japanese naval aviators were reporting a disturbing pattern. American fighters were not patrolling randomly. They were positioned precisely, waiting at altitude along the most likely approach vectors. American anti-aircraft fire was not barrage shooting, hoping to hit something. It was concentrated, directed, beginning at ranges, suggesting prior warning. American bombers were not searching for targets. They arrived already knowing where to attack. The conclusion was inescapable. The Americans had some method of detecting aircraft beyond visual range. But understanding that a thing exists is not the same as understanding how to counter it. And the Japanese Navy never developed effective countermeasures because they never fully grasped the scope of American radar deployment. The symbolic object in this story is the radar. Operator's headset, not the screen, not the transmitter, not the receiver, but the simple headphones through which detection became communication, information became action. Every radar set in the Pacific had an operator sitting in a tent or a ship's compartment or a mountaintop station, watching green phosphorescence and listening to the rhythmic ping of radio echoes. These men, mostly young, mostly technical specialists rather than warriors, formed the invisible front line of the Pacific War. They saw the enemy before anyone else. Their reports triggered the entire defensive apparatus. Their accuracy determined whether interceptors arrived too early or too late, whether anti-aircraft batteries tracked targets or fired blindly, whether convoys escaped or burned. The headset represented something the Japanese military culture struggled to value: the primacy of information over valor. In Japanese naval tradition, the decisive moment was contact, the instant when ships sighted each other, when aircraft merged into dogfights, when courage and skill determined outcomes. Radar moved the decisive moment backward into the realm of detection and response. It made war more abstract, more dependent on specialists and technology, less amenable to the warrior virtues of aggression and sacrifice. It was not that Japanese officers failed to understand radar. It was that radar represented a kind of warfare their culture had not prepared them to fight. American forces embraced this abstraction. They trained radar operators as intensively as pilots. They built redundant detection networks. They developed fighter-director protocols that turned raw radar data into geometric intercepts. They made the unseeable visible and then built an entire operational system around that visibility. The technology was British. The industrial scale was American. The integration of technology into doctrine was the innovation that won battles. June 19, 1944. The Philippine Sea, west of the Marianas. The Japanese Navy commits its remaining carrier strength to a decisive battle. Operation A-Go. 9 aircraft carriers, 473 aircraft, the largest Japanese carrier strike force assembled since Midway. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa has a plan that depends on surprise and range. His aircraft have longer range than American carrier aircraft. He will strike from beyond American retaliation distance, hit the invasion fleet at Saipan, withdraw before American carriers can counterstrike. It is a sound plan, built on accurate intelligence about aircraft performance and carrier positions. It assumes one thing, that his strike forces can approach undetected until they reach attack range. At 1,000 hours, American radar operators on Picket destroyers detect the first Japanese strike wave at 140 miles. Fighter directors vector 62 Hellcats into intercept positions. The Japanese formation, 69 aircraft, flies directly into a prepared ambush at 30,000 feet. In the engagement that follows, the Americans shoot down 42 Japanese aircraft before they reach the carrier task force. The survivors press on, disorganized, to find American carriers already maneuvering, fighters positioned, anti-aircraft batteries tracking. 8 more aircraft fall. Not a single bomb hits an American carrier. The second wave, 130 aircraft, launches an hour later. American radar detects them at 120 miles. The pattern repeats. Interceptors positioned, ambush executed, attackers shredded before they reach release range. The third wave, detecting disaster ahead, turns back without engaging. The fourth wave loses its navigation and ends up over Guam, where American fighters from Saipan intercept them. By day's end, the Japanese have lost 328 aircraft, nearly 3/4 of their carrier striking power. American losses, 29 aircraft, most to operational accidents. Pilots will call it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, and the name captures the one-sidedness of a battle where one side could see and the other could not. Admiral Ozawa, retreating westward with his shattered air groups, struggles to understand what happened. His aircraft had the range advantage. His pilots had approached from the expected vectors. The weather was clear, visibility excellent. Yet American fighters were positioned as if they knew his strike forces were coming, as if they could see through the sky itself. In his report to Combined Fleet Headquarters, he notes that American defensive reactions suggested prior knowledge of attack timing and approach angles. He is correct. American radar had seen everything: the launch, the formation assembly, the approach. The battle had been lost before the first shot was fired. Lost in the invisible realm of electromagnetic detection, where Japanese doctrine had no purchase. This was the trick that defied the Japanese Navy, not superior courage or better pilots or more powerful ships, but the transformation of ignorance into knowledge. The conversion of the electromagnetic spectrum into battlefield awareness. Radar was not a secret. The principles were known. The technology was achievable. What the Japanese never matched was the systematic integration of detection into doctrine, the building of an entire operational system around the assumption that the invisible could be made visible. After the war, American interrogators asked Japanese naval officers why they had not developed comparable radar systems or effective countermeasures. The answers were revealing. Some cited resource constraints. Japan's industrial base could not match American production. Some cited scientific limitations. Japan's electronics industry was not as advanced. But the most honest answers pointed to something deeper, a failure to understand, until too late, that the nature of warfare had changed. That battles were now fought first in the invisible realm of detection, and only secondarily in the visible realm of contact. That information had become a weapon more decisive than guns or torpedoes. The electromagnetic spectrum is not a metaphor. It is the continuum of all possible frequencies of electromagnetic radiation, from radio waves through visible light to gamma rays. Humans evolved to see a tiny slice of this spectrum, the visible wavelengths between 400 and 700 nanometers. Radar operates in a completely different region, wavelengths measured in centimeters, invisible to human eyes, but perfectly capable of reflecting off solid objects. By building devices that could transmit, receive, and interpret these invisible waves, American engineers had given their military the ability to see in frequencies the enemy was blind to. It was as if one side in a battle had suddenly developed the ability to see infrared or ultraviolet, while the other side continued fighting with ordinary vision. The Japanese Navy's failure to counter American radar was not primarily technical. By 1944, they had built their own radar sets, some quite sophisticated. The failure was conceptual and institutional. Japanese doctrine emphasized offensive action, the decisive engagement, the surprise strike, the aggressive maneuver. Radar was inherently defensive, a technology for seeing threats before they arrived. Integrating it into doctrine meant reorganizing command structures, retraining personnel, building communication systems that did not exist. It meant admitting that the ways of warfare they had perfected were obsolete. There is a document in the Japanese Naval Archives, a report dated August 1944, that acknowledges the scope of the problem. An intelligence officer analyzing the Marianas' defeat writes, "The enemy possesses the ability to detect our aircraft at distances exceeding visual range. This capability appears to be systematic rather than exceptional. Countermeasures are urgently required." The report was accurate. It was also too late. By August 1944, Japan had lost most of its trained carrier pilots, most of its merchant shipping, and most of its ability to project power beyond its defensive perimeter. Radar had not caused these losses directly, but it had been the force multiplier that turned American numerical superiority into systematic dominance. Every interception, every ambush, every perfectly timed response added up to an attritional advantage that Japan could not overcome. The American advantage was not merely technological. It was the advantage of a system that could learn, adapt, and scale. When early radar sets proved vulnerable to weather clutter, American engineers developed signal processing techniques to filter it out. When Japanese aircraft began flying low to exploit radar limitations, American designers built height-finding radar to track altitude. When more range was needed, they built bigger antennas and more powerful transmitters. The entire industrial and scientific apparatus of the United States was oriented towards solving these problems, and it solved them faster than the Japanese could adapt. There is a photograph from late 1944, taken aboard the carrier USS Lexington. A radar operator sits at his scope, headphones on, face illuminated by the green glow of the display. Behind him, barely visible, are the pilots who will fly the intercepts his reports will trigger. The photograph is not dramatic. There is no combat, no visible enemy, no moment of obvious heroism. But this image captures the essence of the Pacific Air War more accurately than any photograph of aerial combat. The radar operator watching invisible echoes is the one who determines whether those pilots will have time to reach altitude, whether they will intercept or arrive too late, whether the battle will be an ambush or a desperate scramble. The Japanese never published a similar photograph. Their radar operators were few, their systems limited, their integration into operational planning minimal. It was not that they lacked brave men or skilled technicians. They lacked the conceptual framework that made radar a system rather than a device, that integrated detection into every aspect of operational planning. The trained commanders to fight based on information rather than contact. They fought the war they had prepared for, which was not the war American radar had created. By 1945, the pattern was absolute. American forces detected Japanese aircraft before those aircraft detected their targets. American interceptors were positioned before Japanese formations arrived. American anti-aircraft fire was directed rather than speculative. The few times Japanese aircraft achieved tactical surprise, kamikaze attacks from low altitude, night raids that exploited radar limitations, these were exceptions that proved the rule. The general pattern was American awareness and Japanese blindness, American preparation and Japanese surprise at encountering prepared defenses. The irony is that the Japanese had invented some of the key technologies that made radar possible. Japanese scientists had contributed to early radio research. Japanese industry had developed sophisticated electronics for civilian applications. But invention is not the same as application, and application is not the same as integration. The United States took British invention, added American industrial scale, and then, crucially, reorganized its entire tactical doctrine around the new capability. The Japanese acquired the technology, but never built the system, and in warfare, systems defeat devices. There is a final document worth noting. After the war, the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey interviewed Japanese naval officers about their understanding of American capabilities. One admiral asked when he realized the extent of American radar coverage answered, "When it was too late to matter. We knew the Americans had radar. We did not understand that they had built their entire air defense around it. We did not understand that every engagement was fought in two phases, detection and interception, and that we were losing the first phase before the second even began." This admission captures the essence of the technological surprise. The Japanese had intelligence about American radar. They had reports, captured equipment, technical analyses. What they lacked was the imaginative leap to understand how a defensive technology could become an offensive weapon, how information could become as decisive as firepower, how seeing the enemy before the enemy saw you could determine the outcome of every engagement. The sky over Guadalcanal is empty now. The radar stations are gone. The tents collapsed, the screens dark. But for a brief period, in a war fought across the largest ocean on Earth, this technology gave one side the ability to see what the other could not. It turned surprise into routine, uncertainty into prediction, chaos into choreography. The Japanese Navy planned for a war of decisive engagements where skill and courage would determine outcomes. They got a war of systematic attrition where detection preceded combat, where battles were half won before contact occurred, where the decisive advantage was not valor but visibility. Private First Class Chen survived the war. He operated radar scopes on Guadalcanal, Munda, Emirau, and finally Okinawa. He detected hundreds of Japanese aircraft, triggered dozens of intercepts, saved uncounted lives by giving defenders minutes of warning. He was never decorated, never mentioned in dispatches, never recognized as anything more than a technician doing his job. But his job, and the job of thousands like him, changed warfare more profoundly than any tactical innovation, any new weapon, any strategic doctrine. The lesson is this, that invisibility is not permanent, that what cannot be seen can still be detected, that the spectrum of human awareness can be extended through technology into realms that seem magical until they become routine. The Japanese officers who planned operations in 1942 could not imagine an enemy who could see their aircraft before those aircraft reached the horizon. By 1945, American radar was routine, expected, integrated into every aspect of operations. The impossible had become standard. This is the epilogue written in electromagnetic waves, that information is itself a form of power, that seeing the enemy is half of defeating them. The technology which extends human senses beyond their natural limits changes not just tactics, but the fundamental geometry of battle. The Japanese fought bravely, skillfully, with the weapons and doctrines they had prepared. They lost because the Americans had added a new dimension to warfare, the dimension of early awareness, of invisible sight, of battles fought and won before the first shot was fired. The radar screen glows green in memory, phosphorescent blips marking positions of aircraft that existed in two realms simultaneously, visible to themselves, invisible to their enemies, but completely visible to the technology that had learned to see in wavelengths human eyes could not perceive. The Japanese took off confident in their concealment. The Americans watched them climb, tracked them across hundreds of miles, positioned interceptors, and won battles not through courage alone, but through the systematic conversion of invisibility into awareness. That was the trick the Japanese never learned, the weapon they never countered. The revolution they understood only after defeat, that the war in the Pacific was fought in two spectrums, and they could see in only one.